Night bit like iron. I followed a child's broken tracks past the map's last word, and at first light 300 riders filled my yard. No rifles, just honor. If quiet courage, cold truth, and debts paid in ritual are your trail, cinch tight and don't blink. Snow held its breath over Wind River the way a mule holds a grudge, quiet, heavy, and long. Caleb Whitlock rose before light, cracked ice from the bucket, and fed the stove till iron sang. Coffee went black as coal. Leather creaked when he shrugged into his coat. The world beyond his door was white and still, a sheet spread tight over a sleeping giant. Old Harlan Pike came riding with frost in his beard and a rattle in his laugh. "Keep your hat on straight, boy," he said, swinging down with joints that popped like pine nuts. "Lines are jumpy. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild." Fort's been pacing. "Folks talk, folks always do," Caleb answered. He wasn't much for conversation. The cattle were chewing easy, the wind was down, and the day looked like it might behave. He had repairs in mind. A hinge, a loose rail, a tear in the glove that let the cold find the tender of his thumb. He walked the creek at midday. Ice lay in plates, clear as window glass, humming where water worried beneath. That's when he saw them, little prints wandering in circles, thin and close, as if the maker kept arguing with herself and losing. Not deer, not fox, moccasin, beaded, a child's. The step told a story of hope shrinking with each lap. Caleb stood still long enough to feel the cold climb his boot leather. He found a scrap caught on a branch. A small braided charm, blue beads and deer sinew, stiff with frost. He warmed it in his palm, breath clouding the air. Far off, a raven called once and shut up. The forest went the kind of quiet that means something else. Listening. He followed the prince into the blowdown, where summer storms had laid a dozen pines like fallen soldiers. She was there, drawn small against a log, eyes open but dull with cold. 2 braids, lashes rimed in ice, lips the wrong shade of blue. When he moved, she tensed like a snared rabbit. "Easy," he said, voice rough from disuse. He set his coat between them like an offering. No reach, no rush, just the coat. She stared a long time, then dragged it close, swallowing in the wool till only her eyes showed. From the fort, he could hear a captain's voice he'd never liked. "Don't meddle." From his father, long gone, he heard another. "A man stands straight in a hard wind, or he don't stand at all." Caleb unwrapped jerky, held it out, then set it on the snow where his shadow didn't fall across it. She took it with a quick bird motion, chewing like it hurt. He showed his empty hands, then opened his palm with the little charm in it. Her eyes jumped to it. Some piece of her came back from the edge. She reached, but stopped halfway. He set the charm by her knee. "Home?" he asked, pointing east where the hills rose in long white backs. He walked 2 fingers across his other hand, then touched his chest and the horizon. Sun already leaned west. Night would come early and hungry. She said one word he didn't know, then another he guessed at. 2 fawns." He nodded like he understood everything. He cut the distance slow, letting her watch each move. He wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, till the shake left her bones. When he turned for the ridge, he didn't look back. He heard her get up anyway, the snow's crust breaking under feet too small for this country. They went single file, the way a man and a chance go together for a little while. The cold bit at his cheeks, leather groaned. Somewhere, a tree cracked like a rifle, and the sound ran a mile. "A world's watching," Harlan liked to say. Today it was. Caleb kept moving. He had chosen, and choices make their own weather. The girl kept 3 paces behind, my coat swallowing her down to the ankles. I broke trails slow so she could set her feet in my prints. Snow squeaked under us like new leather. The ridge was a long white whale ahead, the kind a man climbs only when he's got a reason. I had reasons arguing in me. One wore a blue coat and a trimmed mustache. Last fall at Fort Red Butte, Lieutenant Jasper Pike, Harlan's blood, my opposite in every other way, had slid a paper across a barrel and tapped it with a gloved finger. "Keep to your side," he said, voice neat as a ledger. "You bring one of theirs into ours or walk into theirs yourself, you'll answer for it." He didn't say how, he didn't have to. Men had a habit of going missing around lines drawn by folks who never had to ride them. The other voice belonged to my father, dead and buried under Colorado hailstones. He used to split cedar with me and talk while the axe sang. "Cold will lean on you, son. Stand up or bend permanent." That was his whole gospel. I looked back. 2 black eyes watched from the cave my peat coat made around her face. She didn't trust me yet. Smart. Trust gets people dead out here, same as a bad river crossing. I held up the little charm again, blue beads, deer sinew braid, and set it on my palm so the light could find it. She stepped forward, quick and careful, took it and cupped it against her throat like it lived there. A breath left her you could almost see. "2 fawns," she said, touching the charm, then pointing east. The name fit the beads. I nodded. "We'll find her." We moved. I kept my hands out where she could see them when I needed to adjust the scarf or cinch the canteen. When the wind slid off the ridge, it pinched our cheeks and made our breath taste like iron. I offered jerky. She took tiny bites as if counting. I tried a smile, felt strange on my face, and let it fade. Words weren't going to build much of a bridge between us. Steps might. Light thinned early, winter's way. I gauged the time by the way the shadows crawled up the lodge poles, and the river noise went from talk to mumble beneath its crust. There was a place I knew where the creek ran under a cut bank that kept the wind off. We reached it and crouched in the quiet. I struck a spark inside my hat and nursed a thumb-sized fire with shavings from my pocket. Not a flame to be seen from 50 yards, but enough heat to sting feeling back into fingers. She watched me work, eyes flicking to the trees, then back to the fire, then to me. I poured a mouthful of coffee into the lid and blew on it till it steamed gentle. She sniffed it like a small animal and shook her head. I didn't push it. I took the swallow myself and let the heat go down. Boot sign tells on a man. I couldn't sit long. "We keep moving," I said, pointing at the sky's pale strip and then to her feet. She stood without a sound. I wrapped the blanket up higher and tied a knot at her chest so it wouldn't slip. The knot put my hands near her collarbone. I worked slow as prayer and stepped back the instant it held. We climbed the first rise and the land opened into a bench where the snow drifted deep. I kicked a path with my shins, steady and mean. Every 20 strides I turned to check her. She matched me, small and stubborn. The charm hung at her throat and ticked light against the beads sewn there. Once she faltered. I reached, then stopped, palms wide. "Up?" I asked, angling my shoulder. She looked past me east, jaw set, and shook her head. Pride's a fire, too. Sometimes you don't smother it for someone, you walk beside it. We skirted a thicket of bent willows. Somewhere above us a limb cracked and fell, the report sharp as a warning. No birds answered. That kind of quiet sets a man's teeth humming. I felt eyes in the timber and kept mine on the ground. If someone was reading us, they'd see a line of 2, the back print small as a fawn's, the front print big and steady. I let them read. On the next shelf we hit a patch of crust that held our weight. Travel got easier. The ridge felt closer, though night had its hand on the sun now. I did the sums. Distance, temperature, the girl's pace, the shape of the country ahead. A halfway camp on the lee side would be safer. The fort would call it trespass. The village might call it worse. I heard Jasper's neat voice again and felt the old stubborn rise. "People are going to talk," I said, not sure why I told her. Maybe I was telling myself. "Let 'em. You need a roof." Her mouth moved around a word I didn't know. Then she surprised me. She touched her fist to her chest once, soft. The gesture said more than any sentence. It said she knew what I risked, or at least she guessed at it. It said we were bound by something winter-sized and simple. We angled toward a stand of spruce that cupped a pocket of dusk. I scraped a bed with my boots and laid down a mat of broken limbs. She tucked herself in the coat and blanket with a competence that didn't belong to 11. I stacked snow for a windbreak and set my back to it. I didn't plan on sleep. A man doesn't sleep easy on a line he's crossed on purpose. Before the dark pressed all the way, I looked east one more time. A faint smear of wood smoke lay out there under the stars like a pencil mark on white paper. It could have been cloud. It could have been promise. Either way, we were aimed at it. And because I had chosen, the cost felt paid already. Night took the timber slow, like ink seeping through cloth. The little fire I'd nursed was long pinched out. Its warmth lingered on my palms the way a handshake does after a bargain. Snow settled in the branches with soft, tired sighs. Somewhere far off, a coyote tested the dark and thought better of it. Ravens had gone quiet. That kind of hush isn't peace. It's a held breath. I read the trees, and the trees read me back. We moved before true black, just enough light left to see the difference between drift and shadow. I kept to the lee wherever the land offered it, letting the wind ride over our backs like a blanket you don't want but can't shake off. Willow padded in my tracks, the coat dragging a trail between her feet like a third thing that belonged to neither of us. On open flats, I angled for any rise that would break our shape. In cuts, I favored the inside curve where blown snowpacks hard. When the crust threatened to give, I tapped with my heel and listened. A man travels half by ear in winter. She touched my sleeve once and pointed, 2 fingers together like a deer easing through brush. Between spruce trunks I saw what she meant, a pulse of orange where no good fire should be. Then another. Torches. They bobbed along the far bench, men spaced in a line the way the army teaches, covering each other's holes with mathematics and powder. Fort Red Butte had slipped its dogs. Town, I breathed, though she was already smaller than the ground could make her. We bellied into a furrow where wind had scooped the snow clean to old grass. The cold soaked through my coat and took the heat right out of my chest. I cupped her head under my arm to keep her breath from smoking us like a chimney. The lights moved in a slow comb. I pictured Pike's neat gloves holding the idea of us, not the people. The idea's easier to hang a fine line. A torch paused. A voice carried thin and tinny. A word or two I could have sworn I knew once, and didn't want any more. Steel hissed somewhere, a scabbard touched by habit. Boots creaked, dry leather talking to colder leather. The line held, then rolled on. When the last glow thinned into nothing, the dark came rushing back like water filling a ditch. We stayed put 300 breaths by my count. "Your fort?" she whispered, making the word half question, half accusation. It cut closer than I liked. "Not my fort," I said, and felt the truth of it settle like a stone. I waited till stars burned hard and the cold hammered the snow into glass. Then I put us on a game trail the elk had kept open. Elk know where to spend their strength. Men would do well to learn from them. I picked a route that let the wind wash our back trail the way a river unwrites boot sign. Every so often I stepped us along a line of wind-scoured rock, letting the soles speak to stone instead of snow. Small things, but small things make the difference between being seen and being found. Willow held up the charm once, finger tapping the beadwork with a little cluck sound, as if calling a bird. "2 fawns," she said again, softer, then added a word I didn't know, and the smell of sweetgrass in the back of my mind made sense of it. An aunt who braided prayers. I nodded. "We're pointed right We slipped into a stand of older spruce, where the snow lay shallow and blue. The smell of pitch woke memories I hadn't invited. My mother warming tallow on a stove, my father rubbing saddle soap into cracked skirts, the way their hands never stopped moving even when their mouths did. I rubbed a thumb against the grip of my knife to get back to now. A shadow moved against the grain of the other shadows. Not man-big, not deer. My neck hair bit me. I eased to a stop with one finger, and she stilled like a pond under ice. Nothing stirred, but the timber had rearranged itself by one breath. Somebody was reading us, and not with torches. I stood up to it without turning my head, the way you offer your chest to a hard truth. Just taking a child home, I said to the bark and the snow and whatever crouched in it. My voice went thin in that cold, but it carried. The answer was a fallen flake sliding from a bough and landing without a sound. We moved again, slower. The ground took a long sigh, and the sky pelted a lid over us, a thin, mean overcast that eats starlight. Wind frisked the trees and found every gap in my collar. Willow's steps dragged. Pride's a strong leg, but it tires too. I judged the distance to the low ridge that would show us the basin beyond. Close, if you're alone. Far, with a child and a promise in your pocket. On a narrow shelf, the crust broke under her, and she went to one knee. She pushed herself up fast, chin set, eyes bright with anger. She didn't have breath left to spend. I didn't reach. Not yet. I stepped sideways and made the next prints closer, shorter, so she could match them. We'll make the ridge, I said, though there was nobody to impress with those words, least of all the ridgeline. We skirted a deadfall slick with hoarfrost. I set my palm to the trunk and felt the cold travel into my bones, like a story you don't tell anyone. A thin plume of smoke lay to our east again, fainter than before, no taller than a hand. The village was either closer or smarter than I was, maybe both. We topped a low swell and the wind changed. It dropped away all at once, the way it does when you slide into the hollow of a giant's palm. Sound came back. The mutter of the buried creek, the clothy rustle of the girl's coat, the grit in my own breath. I knew that pocket. I'd marked it on a day with no storms, thinking I might someday need its quiet. We bivouac, I said. I scraped us another bed, tighter and lower, with the spruce's skirt for a wall. No fire this time. The air was too thin and the nerves too bright. I tore a strip from a spare shirt and wrapped it around her ankles over the moccasins, pinching the knot with 2 fingers, so I didn't crowd her. She accepted the help without flinching. That was trust starting to grow, the kind that works only when you don't talk about it. She leaned against my shoulder, light as a coat hung on a peg. I listened for torches, heard none. Listened for ravens, heard one far off say all it needed to. Tomorrow, I said, though the word carried more weight than a day deserves. East had turned from promise into proof in my head. Beyond that ridge was smoke that belonged to her people, and men who would test me with their eyes instead of their rifles. I could live with that. I could even prefer it. Her head nodded once, twice, then settled. The night closed around us like a hand that meant to keep what it held. I kept my eyes open till the first thin seam of pale touched the edge of the world, thinking of lines you cross, and the quiet that follows when you cross them right. Dawn came in thin, a seam of pale stitched along the east. My eyes had never shut, but my bones had dozed. I woke inside them with grit under the lids. Willow's head was on my shoulder, light as a magpie. Cold had glassed the world. Every breath felt like licking iron. I checked the country with my ears first. No torch talk, no harness jingle, just the buried creek muttering under ice and the slow tick of frost letting go of needles. Time, I said. She blinked once, steady. Her feet were stone. I took them in my hands and rubbed till feeling fought back, the way a stubborn calf fights the rope, weak at first, then angry. I stripped a shirt tail, wrapped her ankles again, and cinched the blanket higher. Pride will carry you a ways. Heat carries you farther. I turned and dropped to a knee. Up, I told her, more invitation than order. She hesitated the time it takes snow to fall the width of a thumb. Then she climbed, arms around my neck, chin tucked. I tied us together with my bedroll strap, one loop under her knees, one across my chest. Cowboy rig, ugly but true. Her breath found the hollow below my ear and warmed it by degrees till the skin there remembered it belonged to blood. We moved. Weight rides strange at first. A man thinks his strength ends at the shoulders. Turns out it starts between the shoulder blades. I paced it steady, counting in 10 so I wouldn't make boasts my lungs couldn't keep. The ridge humped ahead, nearer now and darker, like the back of some old bull that had lain down in the snow and refused to die. Spindrift came off its crown and walked across the air, thin snakes of white that made a man squint. The sky lowered, gray on gray, a lid sliding slow. I kept to the timber seam where spruce broke the wind and let the land pick our line. Elk signs stitched the slope. I stepped in their choices and took their advice. Willow's weight taught me her story without words. She was light for 11, all sinew and will. Sleep tugged at her, but never took her outright. Once she whispered a string of sounds into my collar, ending on 2 fawns, and I could feel the chant of it in her jaw. I answered nothing, just leaned into the next rise. Pain found new lodgings, hips, knees, a notch between vertebrae I didn't know I owned. I shifted the strap a finger's width and bought us 20 more strides. When the ground offered a shelf, I took it, kneeling so her feet could touch snow and remind themselves they remembered how. Color crept back into her cheeks, slow as sap. She looked east. So did I. Smoke does a different trick in winter. It doesn't climb. It draws a pencil line and holds it. Out beyond the next lift of ground, a faint gray mark floated where no settler would camp this time of year. Not much, not loud, but true. Willow saw it too. Her fingers tightened on the strap, then loosened. The charm at her throat clicked once against a bead, a small sound with a sure meaning. We topped a low knob, and the wind swung around. It brought with it the dry horse smell of far-off corrals and a hint of cooked fat. I stopped dead, not from fear so much as recognition. We were closer than a man should be without announcing himself. The timber around us acted different, like folks in a room turning their faces toward a door you can't see yet. Just bringing a child home, I said to whatever held the other end of that attention. My voice felt too big in the hush, so I let the next words live only in my chest. I eased us to a fallen log sugar-coated with hoarfrost. Set her down, gave her the canteen, 2 swallows only, a third for stubborn. I touched her hands with my own to steal back some heat I didn't have to spare. She didn't flinch. That was a bridge built with steps, not talk. Listen, I told her and lifted my head. She did. We both heard it. No clank of bit, no chain, but a soft horse blow, a long way off, the kind that fogs and then vanishes. Watchers, good ones, I wasn't about to go stumbling the last yards. We wait and let them see what they need to see, I said. She nodded like a soldier and tucked herself small behind the log, eyes level with the ridge's last rise. The sky came down another inch. Snow began to sift, dry as flour. I ran a hand over my beard and felt the ice in it crackle. When I looked at my glove, spruce pitch had polished it, black on black. Somewhere a raven made a single sound that wasn't warning and wasn't welcome. It was the kind of note a judge makes when both stories have been told, and he's thinking on it. Soon, I said, not to hurry anything, just to mark the place. The basin lay over that rim like a promise you could either keep or break. I'd carried the child to the door. The knock, and what came of it, would belong to more hands than mine. We didn't go to them. We let them come. The ridge stood one rise away, white and near, with the basin's breath lifting over it in thin gray threads. Snow fell the way flour drifts from a cook's hand, light, constant, telling on everything. I set Willow behind the hoar-frosted log and showed both palms to the trees. A man can say a lot by not moving. They arrived like shadows that had remembered they once were horses. 3 riders slipped out of the spruce. No clank, no chain, just leather whisper and breath fog. Their ponies were winter slick and small, sure-footed as goats. The men sat easy, wrapped for cold. Hair braided neat, beadwork catching what little light the sky still spared. No rifles raised, none needed. Their eyes did their sums. The lead rider angled his horse until we fit in his left eye. He didn't look at my hands first. He looked at Willow. That was a good sign. I kept my fingers open and my weight on my heels. You don't lean toward a line you're asking permission to cross. Willow pushed back the coat hood so her braids showed and stood, small, straight, and fierce about it. She lifted the little charm at her throat and called out a name I knew now. 2 fawns. The word went out clean and true, carried by cold, like a wire carries current. The middle rider's chin made a small lift. He answered in a stream of sounds I couldn't catch, gentle then firm, the way you talk to a foal that wants to bolt, and you won't let it. I pointed to my chest, then to Willow, then east. Home, I said, the single word I figured we owned in common, if any. I touched 2 fingers to my heart and opened them. No claim, no bargain. Just the truth, set down where it could be read. The lead rider dismounted without hurry. He was younger than I expected and older around the eyes. He came close enough for his breath to join ours, stopped, and looked me over like a blacksmith looks a piece of iron. He's not decided whether to bend. He lifted his right hand, palm out, fingers wide. Not a threat, not a greeting. A measure, I gave him the same, palm open, empty. He nodded once, a weightless thing that still felt like something had been moved from one side of the room to the other. He spoke to Willow. Her face changed by inches like frost melting on glass. She answered quick, pointing to the broken country we'd crossed, then to the charm, then to me. My name wasn't in her language, but she threaded me into the story anyway. The rider listened without crowding her words, then looked back at me. He tapped his own chest lightly and said a name that rode low and calm. I didn't try to repeat it. I put my hand to my chest and said, Caleb. He flicked his eyes once, heard you, and that was plenty. He made a sound that was half whistle, half word. The third rider eased forward and swung Willow up in front of him, small hands finding mane by instinct. She didn't look afraid. She looked braced. The coat swallowed her again, but now it held a different kind of heat. The lead rider gestured with his chin toward the ridge. I understood the invitation and the warning bound up inside it. I walked where they could see me and nowhere I wasn't put. We topped the last lift of ground together. The basin opened like a book laid flat. Lodges rose in a loose circle, hides tight against the cold. Smoke drawn out in low gray lines that didn't so much climb as hold. Horses stood in a drifted corral, heads down, winter quiet. Dogs ghosted between shapes, all ribs and purpose. No one ran, no one shouted. The world did its work while watching us do ours. We paused on that rim long enough for every eye in the valley to weigh me. That's how it felt. Women stepped from lodge flaps and stood with hands wrapped in shawls. A pair of boys eased a pony closer and then thought better of it. An older man by the fire straightened slow, like a tree remembering wind. If there was anger in any of it, it didn't sit on the surface. What sat there was caution and a kind of tired patience I recognized from my own mirror. The lead rider looked at me once more, then down at the village, and made a small, flat motion with his hand. "Come as you are, and exactly no farther than we permit." I nodded. "Fence post duty suits me. You plant and hold." We went down the slope in a file, me on boot leather, between two ponies, Willow ahead on the third animal, her breath making a little steam halo that folded and unfolded with each step. At the edge of the circle, a space opened. No one had to ask for it, it just happened. The riders didn't bring me into the heart. They set me where an outsider belongs, close enough to see faces, far enough to keep hands easy. That was right. A woman stepped forward. Her hair was braided like willows, but silver had found its way into the black. There were lines at the corners of her eyes you get from sun, wind, and laughing when you can afford it. She didn't look at me first, either. She looked at the child on the pony, until all of the mother in her was sure of the inventory. Only then did she lift her eyes to mine. No thanks, no blame. Just a square look between two people who had both packed heavy loads. "Two fawns," Willow said, reaching. The woman's mouth softened, then steadied. She spoke to the riders, to Willow, to the air. Words I couldn't hold, but each one had a shape that made sense to the body, even if the mind couldn't parse it. Somewhere behind us a lodge flap moved, and a man stepped out whose quiet drew the others quiet to it like iron filings to a magnet. He didn't hurry. He didn't have to. Authority, not noise. Beadwork marked his shirt, and winter marked his face. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew the weight of it. We were past the place where rifles do talking, and not yet to where fires do. That thin ground between, where eyes carry the load. That's where we stood. I kept my hands visible, my boots planted, my breath steady. Let them read me for as long as they needed. A fence post doesn't argue with the field. It just shows where the line truly runs. The man who stepped from the lodge drew the villages quiet to him without a hand raised. Beadwork spoke where his mouth didn't. The wind combed his braids and found no purchase. He took us in as if measuring a beam, length, grain, where it might bear and where it might split. He looked at Willow first. That was right. The rider eased her down, and she stood, small but set, the charm bright against her throat. A woman moved from the crowd, lines at the eyes from sun and laughter saved for the good days. She placed both palms on Willow's cheeks and counted all the places a mother counts. When that inventory came up whole, the woman's shoulders fell a finger's width, and the breath she'd been holding for a long night left her at last. A second woman stepped in, older, hair threaded with frost, fingers nimble even before they reached. She touched the little charm and said a name I'd already learned. 2 fawns. The way Willow's face lit told me how many prayers were braided into that bit of sinew. 2 fawns kissed the beads with a briefest smile, then busied herself tucking fur at Willow's wrists, tying what needed tying, setting heat where cold had tried to settle. The man, chief, by the way the circle changed shape around his shadow, came to me alone. He stopped close enough for me to see a pale scar along his jaw, the kind winter leaves when you've argued hard with it. He put his hand flat to his chest and then toward the child. "My daughter," he said, in English shaped slow and careful. Not boast, not warning. Statement that held a world inside it. I touched my own chest. "Caleb," I said, "I kept it spare. Found her by the creek. Cold coming. Brought her home." He studied my face the way a hawk reads a hillside, a long beat past, the length of a fire's pop. Then he dipped his chin once, weightless but carrying weight. He spoke to a young man at his shoulder, who slipped into a lodge and returned with a folded buffalo robe, dark and heavy, the hair thick as a winter drift. The chief held it out but did not push it on me. He gripped the edge with both hands as if it were a thing with its own mind. "Not charity," he said, eyes steady on mine. He glanced once at the wool swallowed around Willow's shoulders, my coat, now hers in every way that mattered. Exchange. I looked from the robe to Willow to two fawns. Two fawns was already fitting my coat to the girl's small shape, as if it had been cut for her on purpose. The truth of the trade sat plain as a brand. I bowed my head a hair, ran my hand once along the hide, dense, warm, a shield against a long walk home, and took it with both hands. Fair, I said. The circle eased then only by inches, but it did. A wooden bowl appeared in a boy's hands. He brought it to me with care a man uses to carry coals. Broth steamed, meat and fat, and something sweet that spoke of roots saved from the good months. I didn't drink like a starving man. I took small sips, eyes down, then up for half a heartbeat to meet the chief's gaze and put thanks where it belonged. He returned the gesture with that same measured nod, a man content to let deeds stand where words would wobble. He pointed at the sky, where daylight thinned to iron. Night, he said. He showed two open hands, then moved one away from the other, paths parting. Danger, he added, which I took to mean the kind that finds men alone between lines. I'll make my way, I told him. The robe settled across my shoulders like a good decision. Heat crawled slow into places the cold had claimed as homestead. Two fawns came close enough to set her fingers on my sleeve. She lifted the charm with her other hand, tapped it lightly, and spoke a string of sounds that landed soft. I caught only one shape of meaning and held to it. A blessing you offer a traveler because the road will always be longer than he thinks. Willow stood within arm's reach of her mother and still somehow seemed to be standing beside me, too. She didn't smile, she wasn't that kind of child, but she gave a tiny, formal dip of her chin. It was the same nod the chief had given me, only smaller, tighter. I answered with one of my own. That was all we needed. I stepped back the way a man backs a horse out of a tight stall, slow, respectful, watching every corner I might bump. The riders flanked me again, not to hem me, but to draw the right path through eyes I could not see. We climbed to the rim under a sky shaved thin. At the saddle the lead rider halted. He touched two fingers to his temple, then sent them toward the basin. Respect turned outward, and then he vanished back down the slope with the others, the horses taking the snow as if they'd been born from it. I wrapped the robe close and set my face to the west. Stars cut through the cloud by degrees. The cold took a new interest in me, then lost heart when it found the robe in its way. Hoof crunch faded behind. The timber ahead took me in. I moved by the lay of the land and by the book the stars write when a man bothers to read them. Once, on a ridge where wind scoured everything to bone, I stopped and looked back. The basin lay hidden, but a flat line of smoke wrote its name across the dark. Harlan would have said something dry about lines and the men who draw them. I let his ghost talk and didn't argue. The robe whispered when I moved. Snow flashed with starlight where my boots chewed it. A coyote lit the night with one clean note and then shut up. By the time the east had the first thought of pale in it, my cabin's squat outline stood against a paper-gray sky. I banked the fire from coals, hung the robe over a chair where the heat could wake it, and set water on. The place felt both smaller and more honest than when I'd left it. I put a hand flat to the table till the shaking quit. Outside, the world held its breath again. I was lifting the coffee when the floorboards under my boots spoke in a voice I didn't know. A kind of quiet thunder that doesn't belong to weather. Cups don't rattle at nothing. I set mine down and listened. The sound came up through the earth like news. The sound rose through the floorboards like a slow river under ice. Steady, many, and coming. I set the cup down before it jumped, took my hat, and stepped onto the porch. Gray light had just climbed the pines. The tree line breathed, shadows thickening, then separating into horses and men. They came three abreast. No clank, no metal brag. Only leather whisper and the huff of animals throwing white fog. Snow took their weight and gave it back with a soft complaint. They fanned at the edge of my clearing, a crescent of stillness that made my cabin look small as a feed crate. I counted without meaning to. Past 100 I quit. 300 wouldn't be a foolish number. I left the rifle inside. I wore the buffalo robe. I walked out till the snow took my boots mid-shin and stopped where a man stands when he wants to be seen and not read as trouble. Hands open, breath steady. The crescent made a gap in the middle like a door being remembered. 2 riders came through at a walk, then one, his pony stepping light, its mane salted with frost. Willow sat on a smaller horse beside him, wrapped clean and proper in my old coat, braids tidy, eyes brighter than the morning. The man dismounted without hurry. Authority doesn't pant. He crossed the snow alone. The village had called him Ironclad. Now I saw why. Not hard, not soft, weight that holds. He stopped at an arm's length and looked me in the face. We had already spoken once around a fire. There wasn't much left. Words could improve. He set a deerskin bundle across his palms and lifted it so it met the space between us. I took it with both hands the way a man takes a newborn or a verdict. The hide was warm from his body. I peeled it back slow. Inside lay a bow dark as river water, polished till the wood kept the dawn. Inlays of shell and bone ran the grip in a pattern my eyes couldn't read, but my hands felt anyway. The string hummed once when the cold touched it, the soft, certain voice of something made right. Ironclad put his hand to his chest, then toward the bow, then to me. English followed, careful and plain. For bringing my daughter through the cold, he said, from our hearts. He touched his chest again, not hard, just true. I didn't have a speech. I raised the bow halfway, not like a weapon, like a thing you mean to keep safe. I'll honor it, I said. It came out hoarse as a fence post in wind, but it carried. Somewhere behind him a command I didn't hear moved through the line. 300 right hands rose and pressed, once, to 300 chests. The sound landed on the clearing like a drum buried under snow, deep, brief, and together. Then silence came back and stood taller than before. Willow brought her pony close enough I could see where two fawns' hands had rebraided the small blue beads. She reached, small and deliberate, and pressed something into my palm, the little charm I'd found frozen on a branch. The sinew was soft again. The beads held warmth. "Keep," she said in English shaped by another tongue, and added words I didn't know that still drew a map in the air. "Don't lose the way." I closed my fingers around the charm. It fit there as if my hand had been made to carry it. I gave her a small nod, the only coin I had worth spending in front of this many eyes. Ironclad stepped back, the space growing with him. He turned, not his head but his whole body, the way a man does when he means a thing to be finished without insult. He climbed onto his pony with the economy of someone born to saddles. He didn't look to see if the others would follow. They did. The crescent bent, flowed, and slipped into the trees from both ends, as quiet going as they'd been coming. Snow lay trampled where they'd stood, steaming faint where horse heat had spilled into it. I stood a while longer because it felt right. The robe held my warmth. The bow had weight like a promise. The charm sat in my fist and told on the beat of my blood. The clearing was the same square of ground it had been yesterday, and it wasn't. The line folks talk about hadn't moved on any map. It had shifted in a place maps don't get to. When the last ear of horse and feather was gone, the ordinary sounds crept back, the water in the bucket ticking, a jay deciding to argue with a pine cone, the stove giving a little pop inside. I went in slow, set the bow on the table and laid the charm beside it. Steam from the coffee found my face and made it human again. Outside, snow remembered how to fall. Inside, something else remembered how to stand. By noon, the steam had left the trampled snow. The clearing held its scuffs like a page you don't erase, so you don't forget the lesson. I was oiling the bowstring with a dab of tallow working it between forefinger and thumb till it sang low and satisfied, when hooves rattled the hollow below the spring. Not many, 5, maybe 6. Metal clinked the way only the army lets metal clink. Order makes its own noise. I set the bow on the mantel ledge without thinking and wiped my hands on a rag. Didn't bother with the rifle. If they wanted a fight, the rifle would only make it shorter. Lieutenant Jasper Pike rode in at the head, blue coat neat as a ledger page, hat brim cut like a rule. 2 troopers flanked him, a third hauling a sled loaded with winter hay the fort had taken off some rancher who owed them. Behind, trailing easy as if he owned the air between us, came Harlan Pike with his mule, hat dipped low against the glare. Jasper reined to the porch and didn't dismount. "Whitlock," he said, the name clipped. His eyes took a quick inventory, boots, hands, door, windows, then slid past my shoulder and fixed on the shape above the hearth. The bow had a way of being quiet and still saying plenty. "You expecting company?" he asked. "Already had it," I told him. He looked past me into the room again, as if the story might be hiding in a corner like a child shying from strangers. He swung down at last, the leather groaning. Snow squeaked under army boots. He came 2 steps up, but not the third. That was politeness or discipline, or both. "We heard riders." He made it sound like a charge. "Plenty of them." "You did." I kept the rest of the sentence in my pocket. Harlan cleared his throat from the yard. "Morning, Caleb." "Coffee on?" he always asked, like he already smelled it. "On," I said. "Mugs'll be clean enough." Jasper's jaw ticked. He didn't like the way Harlan stepped us all into ordinary. "Rancher," he said, "I'm charged to keep this country quiet. That duty gets harder when folks mix their signs. Do I need to know something before I have to read it off a body?" I reached into my vest and brought out the small charm. The sinew was warm from my skin, the beads a shy blue. I laid it in my palm and turned it so the light could find the braid. Jasper's gaze flicked to it, then back to my face, then to the bow again. "What's that supposed to tell me?" he asked. The question had more weariness than bite in it. That a child got home. I set the charm on the table the way a man sets down his last card, calm, no flourish, and that I intend to stay put. Harlan swung one leg over his mule and slid down with a grunt. He climbed the porch like someone who'd paid for 2 of the boards with his own money. "Lieutenant," he said mildly, "you ever notice how trouble and gossip both travel faster? Downhill? By the time word gets to the fort, it's outrun truth by a mile." Jasper gave Harlan a look that mixed blood and exasperation. "Uncle, I've got reports of—" He paused, choosing. "A demonstration. 300 mounted hostiles in formation around a settler's house. That's not a note I can misplace in a drawer." Harlan snorted. "Hostiles a hat you put on other folks when it's cold out. I was a mile back, Jasper. They rode quiet, no rifles out. You can tell a thank you from a circle up if you bother with the details." Jasper took the last stare and stepped into my shadow. We were close enough to see the stubble he'd missed under his ear. "And you?" he asked me. "What do you call it?" "Debt paid," I said. He let that hang between us till the wind tugged at it and gave up. He looked past me again to the bow. I lifted it down and held it out, not to hand over, just to show. He didn't touch it. His gaze traced the inlay, the polish, the small scars where the wood had argued with the maker, and the maker had won. "That's not trade goods," he said finally. "That belongs in a lodge." "It did," I answered. "Now it belongs here. That's the whole story." He blew a breath through his nose and glanced at the charm on the table, at the robe sagging warm over the chair, at the steam from the kettle fogging the window. The shape of his face changed a notch. Confusion first, then something that looked a lot like a person remembering he was a man before he was an office. "Coffee, Lieutenant?" I asked, because some bridges are built from small, hot things. He nodded once. I poured 3 tin cups. Harlan took his like a sacrament. Jasper held his without drinking, letting the heat work on fingers gone white at the knuckles. Lines exist for reasons, he said at last, softer. Men die when we forget them. Men die when we worship them, Harlan put in, voice lazy as a cat in sun. Lines are tools. Tools don't ask to be prayed over. Jasper lifted a hand. Enough, uncle, and looked back at me. I won't have my troopers stumbling into a village because a rancher thinks he's Daniel Boone. I walked a child to her door, I said. If that means I need to answer for something, I'm answering now. He met my eyes and kept them. It wasn't a duel, it was an accounting. After a beat, he swallowed a mouthful of coffee and grimaced at the strength. God, Harlan, you teach him to boil axle grease? Harlan smiled with half his mouth. Puts hair on a soul. Outside, one of the troopers shifted in the saddle. Leather talked to iron. The air had the bite of weather thinking about turning. Jasper set his cup on the rail and squared his hat. Here's where we land it, he said. If you see smoke that's not yours, don't go to it. If you hear hooves that aren't friendly, you get inside and you let it pass. I can't write laws for kindness, Whitlock, but I can keep my boys from mistaking it for something else. Help me by not giving them choices they're not smart enough to make yet. That was as much surrender as a man in his coat can offer without unbuttoning it. I nodded. I don't look for trouble, I told him. I feed my cattle and fix what breaks. That's most of a life. He started down the steps and stopped, eyes on the charm again. What's that say? He asked, chin lifting at the beads. Means don't lose the way, I said, best I can make of it. He seemed to weigh that, then tipped 2 fingers off his hat brim. In a gesture that could pass for respect if you set it in the right light. See, you keep it, he said. They left with less noise than they'd brought. Harlan lingered, leaned against the post, and watched a jay scold up a pile of nothing like it was important. You did right, he said after a while. Felt like the only right on the table, I answered. He nodded. That's how you know? It's the one. He tapped the bow with a knuckle. Gentle. Pretty thing. Don't aim it at pheasants. You'll make the rest of us look shabby. He mounted by steps, 1, 2, curse 3, and gathered his reins. Lines'll stay where they are till men move 'em, he said. Happens slow. Winter's good for slow. When he'd gone, I set the bow back where it could watch the room, and I hung the charm by a nail above it where the light from the stove caught the beads. The house felt different, not bigger, not smaller, truer maybe. Outside, clouds were stacking over the far ridge. Work waited, the kind that keeps hands busy while a mind finishes a talk it started on the porch. I put on my gloves and went to it, the sound of 300 hands on 300 chests, still living somewhere under the noise of the day. Spring didn't arrive so much as loosen its grip. The snow quit arguing at noon and turned to slush that took a man's boot with a wet kiss. Ice on the creek broke its back in long plates and went shouldering downstream, muttering like a drunk. The pasture showed ribs of earth, black and slick, and the cows walked heavier, sides working, tails switched with meaning. Calving season owns a man. I set a lantern at the barn door nights, trimmed the wick till it purred, and checked heifers by the hour. Steam hung over their backs. New life came glossy and knuckled, hit the straw with a wet thump, and found the teat by stubborn will more than sense. My hands remembered their jobs, twisting a breech calf, easing a shoulder, warming slick ears between my palms till they stood like flags. I cut cords with a clean blade and wiped noses so the first breath wouldn't stick. Blood sweetened the air, sharp and warm. Coyotes tested the fence line and got a warning they could understand. Work is its own quiet. It wears a man down even as it holds him up. Between pulls, I'd glance through the barn gap and see, across the room in the house, the bow over the mantel catching lamplight, the small blue charm swinging above it when the draft found the nail. That sight laid a level across the day. Harlan drifted by once on his mule, boots painted with mud up to the ankle. He peered at a fresh calf, blinking dumb at the big world. "Spring makes fools and fathers in the same hour," he said, then chewed a splinter and eyed the sky. "Storm by sundown. Cover your tender, always do," I told him. He nodded as if I'd passed a test he hadn't given out loud, and rode on, letting the mule pick the dry spots the way a man picks his words. Toward evening, the wind swung north and sharpened. I had one heifer stalling on a big calf. I looped a lariat around two slick forelegs and pulled in rhythm. With her strain, steady, no hero work. When the bull calf slid free, he hit the straw like a sack of wet grain and didn't move. I rubbed his ribs hard with burlap, blew into his mouth twice, hard enough to feel my own lungs burn, and thumped his chest with the heel of my hand. He coughed, sneezed, and raised his head to glare at me for interfering with a fate that had seemed settled. "You're welcome," I said, then laughed without sound and stepped back to let nature finish. The storm came like Harlan said, short, mean, and spent quick. After it, the air went clear. You could hear geese high up laying down the law of north. I carried the lantern to the house, set it on the porch rail, and scrubbed my hands in the bucket till the straw smell gave way to iron and creak. That's when the pony topped the rise at the edge of my clearing and stopped with its neck arched and ears working. No metal on him, no shoe clink. He wore winter the way a good knife wears a sheath, easy, close. The rider was young, maybe 13, with a braid tied tight and a face that didn't give away much but time. He sat the animal like he'd been born 2 hands high and had just kept climbing. He didn't come on. He waited till I stepped into the open with my hands easy. He lifted a palm and then tapped his own chest. A name I couldn't catch rolled out calm. He reached into his shirt and brought out a small bundle, wrapped in smoked hide, tied with a strip of sinew and a knot I'd seen on elk snares. He held it across his open hands, so the thing, not the giver, was what you saw. I went to him at a walk, no hurry, took the bundle with both hands. Warm from being carried under a coat, it had a clean resin smell. I opened it slow. Inside lay 3 neat twists of dried plant. One bitter willow bark, one sweetgrass braid, one I knew as bear root by its pepper bite. Tucked beneath them was a square of deer hide, thin and supple, burned with the figure of a raven mid-flight. The lines were spare and sure, each cut telling only what it had to and no more. The boy touched the raven mark with one finger, then lifted that finger to the sky where smoke would go. He tapped twice and drew it straight up. "Oak," he said, careful with the English, then spoke his own words around it like a cup holds water. He fluttered his hand toward the east and made a small circling motion, 2 fingers together, as if calling a friend from across a field. "If needed," I said, finding the shape of it. "Oak smoke." He nodded once, face still. He pointed at the herbs in turn. Willow for pain, bare root for the deep cold that settles in a chest and won't be talked out of it. Sweetgrass for blessing. His mouth shaped the word in his own tongue, and it felt right even if I couldn't repeat it. "2 fawns?" I asked, touching the bundle. He allowed himself the smallest angle of a smile. He tapped the braid of sweetgrass. 2 fawns. Then he reached and with 2 fingers touched the little blue charm hanging at my nail, his gaze flicking to it and back to my eyes in a question that wasn't a question. "I kept it," I said. "I keep it." I opened my palm to show the place it rode most days. He squared in the saddle and let his eyes take one slow pass of the yard. The barn, the stacked wood, the sled with hay, the fence fixed with twine and care. He looked at me one last time, the way a runner looks at a marker on a trail he'll pass again. Then he gave a small click to the pony. The animal turned soft, the way a good idea turns in a man's head when it knows it'll be acted on, and they slid back into the trees without putting a wrinkle in the air. I stood in the middle of my clearing, with the bundle warm in my hands, and the world rung around me. Creek gossiping, geese thready overhead, a cow bawling for a calf that had already answered. I carried the gifts inside, set the sweetgrass on the mantel, the willow and bare root in the tin that kept mice honest. I hung the raven-marked hide under the bough so the shell inlays and the burned lines could keep each other company. The charm I left where it lived, blue when the stove caught it, dark when the room went quiet. Night found me sitting by the stove with my boots off and my shirt unbuttoned to the sternum, steam of a fresh cup in my face, and the ache of work settling into a good place. Outside, clouds ran their errands. Inside, a line I'd carried in me since winter, hard, angled, and brittle, had eased to a curve you could lean against. Boundaries were still where they belonged. I could point to each. But there was a way across now that didn't bleed, a signal you could send without noise. I fed another stick to the fire and watched it catch, slow and sure. The ribbon of smoke climbed, turned, and found the flue. I pictured oak smoke rising straight one day. No message of panic, just a call between neighbors when the country throws a problem too big for one brand. The thought didn't make me smaller. It made the place wider without making it thin. In the barn, a calf sneezed like a man. The cows shifted, hooves thudded in straw. I stood, set my cup down, and took one last look at the bow, the raven mark, the little blue beads. All right, I told the room. Back to it. A man's got chores even on the days the world changes. By late spring, the hills quit pretending to be dead. Willow catkins fuzzed the draws. The creek ran loud enough to make talk seem wasteful. Grass pushed through the thatch with the stubbornness of cattlemen and saints. I walked fences with a pocketful of staples and a hammer that had learned my hand. Calves wore their ears too big and their legs too long and made a game of running from nothing, then standing proud like they'd won. Inside, I set the bow where morning caught it. Shell inlay winking like bits of river. The raven-marked hide hung below. Burned lines spare and sure. Above them both the small blue charm had its nail, and the stove's draft gave it life now and then, a quiet swing no man ordered. I swept the hearth, folded the buffalo robe, and found myself doing it careful in a way that didn't feel like fear or show. It felt like keeping a promise. Harlan came by with a busted singletree and a story about a rooster who'd learned to peck bootlaces. He eyed the raven mark and snorted soft. Best neighbors a man can have are the ones who mean it, he said. Second best are the ones who keep to their side unmade unless asked. He let the thought sit. You look like a man who knows which is which. I'm learning my country, I told him. He nodded once. Takes a life. Lucky if you get close by the end. He squinted toward the far ridge. Fort's calmed down. Jasper's writing more and writing less. That's better work for a man with edges. He set the fixed single tree across his saddle and gathered reins. You ever need more hands than you've got, don't be proud enough to drown, he said, then left me to the day. Toward evening, I climbed the long slope behind the barn, same one where winter had made its stand. The grass up there came short and blue, good in August, better now. From the top I could see a width of the world that would make a painter quit for lack of canvas. To the east, the basin lay cupped in light. Smoke lifted from it as a thin, steady pencil line. A household kind, not a call. I tipped my hat without thinking. It felt like answering a neighbor's wave across a fence you both agree to honor. A raven crossed between us and the sun, wings working slow. the way a man rows when he isn't late. It made one sound that could have been approval, or just the way ravens keep books. Either sat fine with me. Back at the house, I split a stick of oak and stacked a few lengths by the back step, not because I meant to throw up a column, not unless the country wrote me into needing it, but because a man sleeps easier when his choices are cut and dried. From the bundle 2 fawns had sent, I took the braid of sweetgrass and set 3 strands in a saucer. I touched a coal to them and let them smolder till the room filled with a clean, round smell that found the corners and made them less sharp. I didn't speak any words over it. Some thanks don't wear shoes. I watched the smoke climb and turn and find the flue sure as a cow finds the gate she's used twice. The charm lifted once in the draught and came back to still. I tied a bit of rawhide through its sinew and looped it to my vest button, not to show, just to carry. Work didn't stop for ceremony. A fence needed shoring where frost had heaved a post. A slick-eared calf needed doctoring for scours. I did both as the light went down, hands steady, the way a man keeps his end of small bargains with the land. Geese ran a rag of sound south to north. Somewhere a fox laughed like it knew something, and didn't mind keeping it. After dark, I set coffee to lean, and took my chair where it faces the door. The bough threw a long shape up the wall. The raven cut on the hide looked like it might fly if you told it to, so I didn't tell it anything. The house spoke in its little ways. Stove ticking, a knot in the log alley settling, the slow breath of a place that has decided you belong as long as you pull your weight. I thought about lines, the ones men draw on maps, and the ones winter draws in rooms on faces, the kind you cross because a child's tracks ask you to, the kind you keep because peace is a fence that stays mended by consent. Honor isn't a parade, it's the quiet rule you follow when nobody writes it down for you. I took the charm off the vest and laid it on the mantel under the raven's wing, the beads blue as evening. The room held steady around it. Out past the dark window, a cow coughed and settled. Wind worried the eaves and then forgot what it wanted. Maps can say what they please, I told the empty room, which wasn't empty at all. A man's got to know his own line and keep it. The words didn't need company. I banked the fire, checked the latch, and let the house go dim. Before the last glow slid off the inlay on the bow, I looked once toward the east and pictured a pencil mark of smoke going up clean if ever I asked, and hands I hadn't met yet answering, because we'd all decided to make room for that kind of thing. I slept easy, not because the world had turned soft, but because it had turned honest. And in the morning, there'd be chores, the kind that keep a man straight when maps go wrong. When Wind River goes still, you can hear small mercies, the hiss of coffee, leather settling, a promise kept. If this ride sat right with you, drop 0 in the comments. If you'd saddle up again, drop 1 hit subscribe and ride along. Plenty more trails ahead, some leading home.